Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, they f***ed around and they found out. Let's get started. Another week and another ceasefire. I want to first acknowledge the fact that a number of our people were released from captivity after 500 days. It is absolutely tragic to watch these, but we are so happy they're home. So first of all, I want to honor the people and their families. Thank God, and hopefully soon the rest will be home. And it is the exact fact that they have been released that I want to talk about effing around and finding out. Because if you may remember, if you follow the news, pretty much right after last week's release of hostages, we had a whole bunch of things that happened that almost derailed the entire ceasefire. You might remember from earlier in the week, we had Hamas officially come out and said that they were done or postponing releasing hostages. Of course, they lied and said it was based on Israel, which, by the way, if you go back to some of our old podcasts, the one called I'm Psychic, I called it. So they blamed Israel for breaking the ceasefire, and so therefore they said they weren't going to release any more hostages. Of course, President Donald Trump came in and essentially gave Israel the green light to say, if they are breaking the ceasefire, we back you 100% to do whatever you need. And they effed around, and then they found out, because Israel eventually moved their army to the area around Gaza to prepare to go back in. And sure enough, Hamas, as much as their pro-Pally liars like to pretend are the big strong winners in all this, ended up releasing the hostages as expected. As I've said on my previous podcasts about the whole ceasefire thing, we've watched for years as Hamas pushes the envelope. They try to do whatever they can in order to not follow the deal and dare Israel to actually break the deal, stop the deal, go back to fighting. And this is kind of what's been going on for the last week. And in response to this effing around and finding out, in addition to Donald Trump claiming that Israel has every green light to do whatever they want, the Israeli cabinet has come together and started formulating a plan. I'm not sure if that plan is to actually start the war again or use this green light from Donald Trump to apply way more pressure to Hamas to let all the people go. There has been reports in places like the Jerusalem Post that have said that phase 2 negotiations of the ceasefire, just as a reminder, we are in phase 1 right now, phase 2 negotiations are underway. And as part of phase 2, Hamas was supposed to agree to give up power. So in order for us to go to phase 2, it would require them to give up their power and to go into exile. According to Jerusalem Post, they've actually agreed to this. Now, I don't know if this is true. I don't know if this is rumor. But in order for the war to not continue and for a ceasefire to continue, they need to give up power. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's part of the deal. So we'll wait and see to figure out if they're going to do that or not. We can definitely see here they effed around on October 7th, and now they're finding out. They might have to go into exile. But we do have to come up with a new plan for the day after without Hamas. We do have the Donald Trump plan, which apparently everybody's against. But maybe there's some other people that could help us with coming up with a new plan for the day after. On our last podcast, we talked about the Trump plan and how even if it may not work logistically, it may be a pipe dream, it has forced the world to start talking in a very different way. And that especially goes to the Arab world, where if you've listened to any of our podcasts in the past, you know that the Arab world has essentially done nothing to help the quote-unquote Palestinian Arabs. The reason being that those same Arab countries have their own Palestinian Arabs in them that they treat as second-class citizens. They don't care about the people that are now called Palestinians. That's because they know that before 1948, they were just regular Arabs like everybody else. And after 1948 to 1967, these people were literally Jordanians and Egyptians. So the Arab world has never really cared about these people that are only being used as a weapon against Israel. Not to mention how much these exact people cause problems in all of the Arab countries around the world. There's a kind of joke, but it's 100% based on facts and reality, which is the Palestinian Arabs have always found a way to be on the wrong side of literally every conflict. Whether it's in an Arab country, siding with a dictator that then gets overthrown, like Saddam Hussein, or if it's in Kuwait, who were hoping that Saddam Hussein would invade Kuwait, and then when they lost, they ended up getting expelled. Or if it's the Jordanians or the Lebanese that have had wars in their country because of the Palestinian Arabs. There's a very specific reason why the Arab world cares nothing, and in fact, in many cases, dislikes the Palestinian Arabs. They might save face and throw some aid their way when there's a conflict and put some flags on some aid that they put into the Gaza Strip to make it seem like they care, because they have their own constituency that they want to look like they care about the Palestinians. But let's get this straight. None of these countries are even accepting a single person. For countries that care so deeply, they don't seem to care too much. That being said, Donald Trump has forced the Arab world to come up with an actual plan for once. Considering the fact that Donald Trump put forward a reasonable plan, if you listen to my last episode, the Arab world can't have that. The Arab world doesn't want these people, so they will do anything to make sure that those people do not end up in their countries. The irony being that the Western world, places like Canada, are opening their arms to these people, where their own cousins don't want them. You can ask yourself why, or what they know that we don't. But this past week, we've heard the Arab world calling a big meeting. All of the main powers of the Arab world are having to come up with a counter proposal to what Donald Trump has proposed. Because they don't want Donald Trump's being the only option, they need to come up with a plan. And it's the first time they've really had to do that. And it might be just because Donald Trump has put forward his plan, which will, I assume, go into effect if no one has any other ideas. It's almost as though the Arab world has been effing around for many years, and now they are finding out. So as I said on our last podcast, this is a little bit of a game changer. We've changed the negotiating table. Maybe the Arab world will actually come up with a half-decent plan. I'm not holding my breath. But if they did, or maybe it starts a negotiation, we might actually be seeing movement in the whole Middle East issue. And as this episode is very obviously called, clearly this was not the plan of Hamas. Hamas effed around, and now they found out to the point where they have to give up power, and someone in the Arab world is going to have to take over. So we will wait and see what the Arab world has planned for this situation. But I wanted to talk about two other ideas. One is a formal plan from a big influencer. We'll get into that in a second. And the other one is an interesting point made by another influencer. I believe that I've spoken about Sahar from Sahar TV on YouTube and Instagram. He made a really interesting point when he debates people. The interesting thing he asks them, which is a great question, if all of Israel today, God forbid, became Muslim, became Arab land, would there be peace in the Middle East? And he usually points out to the fact that there might actually be peace because this isn't really a land war, it's a religious war, which is a great, fantastic point. The only reason they want that land is because the Jews are there. If there were Arabs and Muslims there, they wouldn't care. So it's not about the actual land. But I want to take this one step further. What is really interesting, if you imagine that, let's say, the Jews, God forbid, all disappeared from Israel, would there be peace in Israel? Or call it Palestine? Would there be peace in the Middle East? Let's just see how things are going so far around Israel. So far, if you look at, let's say, Lebanon is broken. Lebanon has multiple issues between Muslims that are Sunni and Shia, and even the Christians that have been colonized by the Muslims. If you look at Syria, I don't think anybody would make the claim today that Syria is doing so well for itself, considering what they're going through, the civil war that happened. If we look at Iraq, clearly a little bit of a trouble in Iraq between the Sunnis and the Shia. If you look at Egypt, we've had multiple coups between the Muslim Brotherhood and the other Muslims, all killing the Coptic Christians. And then, finally, Yemen, a glowing diamond in the rough of beautiful peace and coexistence, right? The reality is that the Jewish people in the land of Israel are not the problem. If you were to give Israel to the Arabs, they would do the same thing they've done with every other country in the Middle East, which is fight, which is kill each other. So the irony being that if we gave them the land, if somehow the world comes up with this idea that the Jews need to leave, it's not going to create peace in the Middle East. It's going to be yet another country filled with people killing each other, and the world turns a blind eye, because this time there are no Jews to blame. So this idea of a one-state solution, which essentially would be either the Arabs and the Jews living together in not peace, or the Jews being expelled and ethnically cleansed like everybody wants, also wouldn't bring peace. So maybe there's another option here. I don't pretend to be an expert, whereas our next person we're going to listen to clearly is an expert. He is on every possible show talking all this wisdom and expertise on the region and on Arabs and even on Jews. So we're going to play a clip of what apparently the alternative to the Trump plan is. And this is from Cenk Uygur of TYT, or the Young Turks. Let's just say a questionable figure when it comes to his opinions on Israel. Here he is on Piers Morgan when Piers asks him on what his opinion is on how to solve this current problem, if we're not going to use the Trump plan. And let's hear what he has to say.
So, as you know, Piers, from day one, what I said was Israel should use special forces. This bombing, indiscriminate bombing of the buildings was outrageous. It was always meant to level it. Hold on. So then what I said after that, Piers, if you remember, is you should do a deal with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank to give the occupied territories back to the Palestinians, where it belongs, and have a two-state solution that we've always fought for. And that way, they would have the authority and the credibility to be able to push Hamas out of the Gaza.
I'm just going to stop it here. There's more that we're going to get to, but just this part. We'll see if it makes any sense. Maybe he's going to create peace in the Middle East. So the first thing that he says, which is kind of unrelated to the major situation, but we'll get to it, is that Israel shouldn't be bombing from the sky. Israel should only be sending in special forces, as if that will definitely solve the problem. Nobody would be complaining about Israel's activities if they only use special forces, except for the fact that he and the rest of the anti-Israel world were up in arms when Israel used special forces. If you remember the times that they rescued civilian hostages from Gaza, that was special forces, and they complained. How dare you? You hurt people while you were doing that. That is so wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. So I just wanted to point out the irony here when people give these plans, and meanwhile, when you see other clips from them, they complain about the very thing that they're suggesting now. It's kind of like Israel can't do anything right, which we've heard Mehdi Hassan say, that there is literally nothing Israel can do that they will not condemn. Back to the idea, which is just simply give Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. That will solve the problem. Except for the fact, and he knows this reality, that the majority of Palestinian Arabs hate the Palestinian Authority because they are absolutely corrupt. So handing Gaza to the Palestinian Authority is kind of stupid. And not to mention, in 2005, when Israel actually did hand over the Gaza area, it was to the Palestinian Authority. And what happened after that? A civil war between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, which led to death in the streets. His plan literally ignores the reality on the ground, which is that the Palestinian Authority is hated, Hamas has already gained strength within Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, and the Palestinian Authority has not been able to actually stop the terrorism in their own land, in the land that they officially control. So giving them Gaza filled with Hamas terrorists is going to lead to Hamas going away? It is a ridiculous idea if you think about it. What would end up happening is the exact same thing that happened in 2005, which is the Palestinian Authority takes control, eventually Hamas grows its power, and they take over. But let's see what else happens in his plan.
So then you go to the Arab countries, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and you say, oh my God, we got a deal. We got a two-state solution. The Palestinians are going to finally have a homeland. Now you guys pay for the rebuilding. I guarantee you that they do that. That is an easy solution. The only thing blocking that solution, and that way America doesn't pay anything. There's no more killing. There's peace.
This all sounds utopian and so easy, except that, of course, you've still got a large Hamas presence, as we see with the release of all these hostages. A
no,
utopia picture
Piers,
you're painting it bears no relation to reality.
It's not utopia.
Hamas
it's super simple. You leave it to the Palestinians. That's why I'm saying do the deal with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. You leave it to the Palestinians to drive Hamas out. So that's their internal business. But in order to do that, you have to have a deal for a two-state solution. And you make the Middle Eastern countries, the Arab countries that have always said that they want an independent Palestine, pay for rebuilding Palestine. It makes perfect sense.
We won't go over the same issue before, which is the fact that the Palestinian Authority cannot be an authority in Gaza because they don't have the political strength or even the physical strength. For his idea, they would need Israel to finish the job of taking out Hamas. Pierce actually questions him on the show, I won't play it for you, but says this utopian idea that the Palestinian Authority just shows up and all of a sudden snap of a finger and Hamas gives up, leaves, just decides not to be terrorists anymore is completely outrageous. We can see Hamas growing strength in the Palestinian Authority area right now. So what's going to happen when they're already there? The Palestinian Authority doesn't have the ability to control it. That's why Israel is going in to the West Bank or Judea and Samaria and taking out Hamas targets for the PA. The idea that he's presenting, suggesting that all we have to do is put the Palestinian Arabs in charge and tell them they have a state and all of a sudden they'll be fine, is ignoring reality. But it doesn't matter to him because his goal is essentially just getting the state, so that way it's a stepping stone to when Hamas takes over, and now we have a rogue Arab extremist state next to Israel, and they'll finish the job. And as for his last statement, which is that don't worry, no one else is going to have to pay for the reconstruction, the Arab world will take care of it, but only if there's a Palestinian state. Let's talk about that for a second. As I said earlier in the podcast, the Arab world doesn't care about Palestinians. They have not lifted a finger. They have not given any money. We hear about the genocide and the starvation and whatever you hear, and the Arab world literally doesn't care. They don't help. They barely send any aid. The majority of aid, actually, ironically, comes from Israel, not the Arab world. So we're supposed to think that once we simply make it a state, that all of these Arab countries are going to somehow just magically start funding billion-dollar projects in a country that they kind of don't care about now? He really is living in a dream world. In 2005, when the Palestinian Authority took over Gaza, I didn't see checks coming in from the Arab world trying to help them build. How can we assume that these countries are going to fund billions of dollars of building in this area for a country that will surely be in a civil war within a couple of years, let alone might turn into a rogue terror state run by Iran, their own enemy? There is no way that these people are going to fund it. It's just not going to happen. And I'll let you in on a little secret that I think Chink knows, but the difference is I don't think he's willing to say it. At least I hope he knows it. Maybe he's brainwashed. I don't know. The Arab world, behind the scenes, in all of their normalization deals, even the Saudis, every deal it's ever been to make peace with Israel has always contained the little asterisk beside it saying, let's try to make a future Palestinian state. This has been for many, many years now. The Abraham Accords, Egypt's peace deal, Jordan's peace deal, the Saudis have actually said that they want this included in their deal, a quote, pathway to a state for the Palestinians. Not one of them has actually cared to make it. Not one of them has asked to make it. Not one of them has been pressing the Israelis to make it because they don't care. They don't like the Palestinian Arabs. Many of them don't believe they exist. They're not a real nationality. They were invented. So none of these people are going to be jumping at the chance to create and fund a terror state, except for maybe Qatar, who's already funding a terror state, and Iran, who already funds terror states. So nothing is going to change. The Arab world is starting to make peace with Israel and fighting against Iran and their proxies. They're not going to start funding those proxies. In the end, I really don't know what's going to happen with this ceasefire phase 2, if Hamas is going to be willing to turn themselves over and go into exile, if that's just a temporary plan until they can eventually come back and take over whatever area of Gaza they can get. let's just be honest, they're already trying to take over the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. So I don't foresee them really giving up completely. But all of the ideas that are being put forward essentially are forgetting the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is that the Palestinian Arabs in Gaza, the ones that support Hamas, have no interest in peace. And the Arab world essentially has no interest in an actual Palestinian Arab state, except for Iran and Qatar. And that state is just supposed to be the first step towards the destruction of Israel. So as long as the world is trying really hard to make this state for the Palestinian Arabs, they're ignoring all history and facts. We know that the Hamas terrorists took over Gaza from the Palestinian Authority by force. We know they turned that area into a terror state. So why we are proposing the idea that we should do the exact same thing again and hope things work out differently? What's the only difference? That the Arab world, who's not going to support them, is going to hand them a whole bunch of money and that's going to solve the problem? All the Hamas terrorists now are just going to go, well, the Arab world is paying, so I guess we got to go into exile. It is very clear that any future cannot contain Hamas. They will continue to push envelopes. They will continue to commit terror because that is literally their charter, to destroy Israel. And they will continue to f*** around, and they will definitely continue to find out. And hopefully, God willing, one day soon, that whole region will be free of Hamas, and everybody who lives there, no matter what their background and what their faith, will live freely and happily without any more war and any more terrorism. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.